So I'm about to head out to a local pond and test out this. This is the MIOPS mobile remote. Now, if you've been familiar with my work and my channel, my education for long exposures, you know that for a long time I've been using the TriggerTrap. TriggerTrap actually went under. The company went under, and it was sad when it went under. I'm still friendly with the inventor of the product, the owner of the company. I'm still a big fan of everything that he does. When the MIOPS people approached me, I noticed that the products are very similar. So I asked my friend with TriggerTrap about it, and he talked to me and told me the story about the sort of utilization of software and libraries that were created for TriggerTrap, and how MIOPS is basically sort of taking what TriggerTrap was doing and sort of expanding on it. So I was kind of excited about this because, I am a fan of what TriggerTrap was doing, and I had a lot of ideas of where they could take their products, and I talked to them about it, and it seems like MIOPS might be headed in that direction. I'm going to quickly show you what they sent me to review, and then when I'm done with this, we're going to go out to the field, and I'm going to actually utilize it. These came in separate packages. I just threw it all into one box just for simplicity, but nice packaging, very nice box. So we've got a USB charger cable for charging this little device. This is the remote. This is the MIOPS mobile, right? And so this needs to be charged for power because this can do a lot, and it needs a charge in order to do that. It also can be updated, firmware could be updated inside of this, and it could be done by plugging into the computer and using their desktop software, or it can be done by plugging it, just using your phone and doing it through the app. Now I have a cable that is actually for the Nikon DF. Now I will be setting up my Nikon DF out in the field and recording using my Nikon D850, the actual process of using it using the DF. Keep in mind what you can do is also limited to what camera you have. Now here's the cable for the Nikon D850. Now you can tell you've got a USB style plug versus a 10-pin connector. I believe both are proprietary to Nikons, but yeah. So I've got these two different cables, so I can use this MIOPS remote with either of the cameras. Okay, so there's two ways to use this. I can either use the MIOPS just like TriggerTrap, where I have the cable that goes into the camera. So this goes into the camera, and then I plug in directly to my phone using the headphone jack. Now, I have an iPhone 10 now, and the iPhone 10 does not have a headphone jack, so I would have to use a dongle, a sort of lightning to headphone dongle, which I have one, but I don't really want to use it if I don't have to. So that's where this handy device comes in. Now, this allows me to not use this sort of intermediate thing, which also requires my phone to be, wired to the camera, but I can now take the part that's plugged into the camera, and then take this tiny headphone jack, put it into the remote, put this on my hot shoe, and just plug in to my camera like so, right? And what it allows me to do is this is wireless to my phone. This is great for cameras that don't have the ability to do any sort of intervalometer, some HDR, some long exposures, some time lapse, all that stuff via the camera software or the app that comes in. So for example, the Nikon D850 has snap bridge, and through it I can trigger my camera remotely. I can use it as a cable release. But when I'm in bulb mode, I actually can't do a specific time, right? Through the app, through the wireless system. But by using this, the MIOPS, I can now be wireless and do remote triggering with a long exposure. I can now control so much more. I can do time lapses without long exposure time lapses, HDR time lapses, all of it using this. Whereas built into the camera, I can do time lapses, but it's not the same. This really just unlocks a lot more possibilities of what you can do wirelessly. I no longer have to be tethered like I did with the TriggerTrap, or even with the original MIOPS, which is similar to TriggerTrap. You had to go from cable to phone, so you're really from camera to phone, you're literally tethered to your camera. Now it's just wireless thanks to this sort of tiny device. It is really tiny. Lens cap, MIOPS. Look how tiny that is. This is a 77 millimeter lens cap. This is the ENEL15A battery for the D850. That's the MIOPS remote. You can see how tiny that is. So I am excited to give this thing a try out in the field. I have been testing it in the studio and it's been working well. But I actually want to take us out of the studio and go to the pond that's near my house and see what we can do. See what we can do with it. Make some photographs. Let's do this thing. So I'm here at this pond and we got some water, it's got some ripples in it, and I'm really going for a scene where I'm photographing these two spikes here, which are really to test the level of the water and trying to get a smoothness of the water behind it and to get no ripples using neutral density filter. I've got a polarizer on here with the Wine Country camera system. I got an 85 millimeter lens on here in the MIOPS Mobile. So I'm going to use the MIOPS Mobile to photograph this scene using neutral density filters, and I'm going to be wireless. Not using, this camera is not wireless, it's the Nikon DF, and so I'm going to be wireless using the MIOPS Mobile in order to set my exposure and do a long exposure not tethered to the DF, which I usually was with the TriggerTrap, but with the MIOPS I can do it through Bluetooth right to my phone, and do a lot of things more than just neutral density, long exposures. I could also just do, time lapses and things like that I normally couldn't do with the DF because there's no wireless. So the first thing to do is I got my scene. I'm already set up here. I've already got my, my framing of what I want to do. I've got the polarizer locked in, and all I'm going to do is get the main exposure. So I'm going to photograph the main exposure and then open the MIOPS app to determine what I need to do to get it to a long exposure. I'm at ISO 100, and right now I'm at a 60th of a second. And let's see, I'm gonna go to F8, and I'm gonna open up the shutter a little bit, and looks like it might be 1/8 of a second. 1/8 of a second is a good exposure. I can look at the histogram and double check, and that looks good. Not much in the darks because there's not much dark going on right here, but that's kind of expected. And now I'm just going to get a neutral density on here and figure out what I need to do. So I'm going to put on a 10-stop filter in here, and there's my 10-stop. I'm going to drop it into the Wine Country camera holder. Now I have 10 stops in there. I have the MIOPS Mobile app open. Now, again, this is the remote, so when I opened up the app, it said what device you're using. I'm using the MIOPS Mobile remote. And I went to the neutral density calculator, which in here, I chose an 1/8 of a second, which is my base shutter speed, and a 10-stop neutral density filter. And it tells me my new shutter speed is 2 minutes and 8 seconds. So I'm going to go back to the MIOPS Mobile main menu, and I'm going to choose timed release and click on exposure and adjust it so it says 2 minutes and 8 seconds. So now that it's set for 2 minutes, I'm going to drag it down to lock it in and hit press here in order to start it. And now it's going to go for 2 minutes, and I'm not tethered to my camera. Now here's the thing that I want to find out, which I'm going to test right now, is I'm curious if I lock my phone, if it'll keep going. So I'm going to lock my phone, and as you can see, it's still going, which means that I can actually multitask and do other things on my phone, like take pictures, potentially, which I'll test that next, while this is still going. So I'm going to just unlock my phone. It is still counting down, which is really nice. Let's try taking a picture. So I'm going to leave the app and open up my camera app. Taking pictures here from my camera app. And then let's go back to it and see if it's still counting down. And it actually stopped counting down. So you really can't leave the app, it looks like. You cannot leave the app. It actually, the funny thing is it's still going. So that's really interesting. So, one point that MIOPS should think about addressing is multitasking, because I want to be able to do something else on my phone while this is going, and I can't. Let's try this again. And so I'm just gonna leave my phone here. At least I'm not tethered. My phone does not have to be attached to the camera, which is a nice thing, but it does have to not be doing anything else. So that is something I hope MIOPS looks into, because now for 2 minutes, it stopped. That's interesting. Let's try this again. So apparently the screen can't even go off because it stops the timer. So that's something that really does need to be addressed. That worries me a little bit because that really shouldn't be. 1:36 left. 1:12. 1 minute left. 47 seconds. So this exposure is almost done. It's about to rain, so I'm gonna head out after this is done. I'll talk more about this back in the studio about what else the MIOPS remote can do, or what the app can do with the remote, really. But here it goes, 5 seconds, and that looks nice and smooth. So I just want to take a moment and show you on my phone what it looks like to use the MIOPS remote and really the MIOPS mobile app. So here we are in the MIOPS mobile app, and you can see that it gives you an option of how are you connecting. Are you going from using the dongle and being tethered to your camera? Are you using the MIOPS mobile remote? Or are you using the MIOPS Splash, which is, I think, a newer product of MIOPS that allows you to basically record movement of drops. I believe that's something what it's like, water drops. So I'm using the remote. As you can see, I've got it right now tethered to my DF, which has no lens on it, but that's okay. It is attached to it. I'm going to select the remote. It's going to then prompt me for which one is it, and it is that one. I've already synced it up, so it's all good to go. Now in this screen, you've got a ton of options of, what do you want to do? Okay, now what I was doing out in the field was I was using the neutral density calculator, and I was choosing, what stop filter I'm using, what my base shutter speed is, and it's then showing me what the time should be based on that. Now, there are other things. You can just do a cable release, so I can press here and take a picture, okay? Listen. All right, so simple as that. I can press and hold, so I'm in bulb mode right now. Camera is in bulb mode. I can press and hold. And simple as that, right? So that's a press and hold. So you've got a normal sort of cable release built into the app, but again, I'm technically using my phone not tethered to my camera at all, so it's completely wireless. This is kind of the same thing as if your camera has its own sort of built-in Wi-Fi connect system to trigger your camera, right? Then you have press and lock, which is basically press here, take the photo, and it's gonna keep going, and then press to stop. Then you have timed release. Now this is what I was doing with neutral long exposures. So you basically click on the time, you would set your exposure to, let's say, 1 minute, and you would drag down to lock that in, and then you'd tap it, and it's gonna count down from 1 minute to actually take the photo. I'm actually gonna stop it because we don't need to sit here for a minute. We have self-timer, so you could do self-timer if you wanna go beyond what your camera can do. Most cameras go to about 10 seconds. So if you wanna go beyond that, you can use self-timer. Timed release and self-timer, so you can set up a self-timer and then do a long exposure based on your self-timer. So it's not very useful, but it could be useful. Basic time-lapse, so you can set your basic time-lapse intervals and whatnot. You can do long exposure time-lapse. You could do bulb ramping time-lapse. Road time-lapse, this is great for if you want to attach your camera to, let's say, the window of your vehicle as you're driving. You can sort of set all of that. HDR time-lapse, so you can set your EVs and how many frames and do full HDR time-lapse. Now, of course, that's not going to do the post-processing for you, which will take you forever to do, but it does let you do a lot. HDR, right? So you got a normal HDR triggering right here, not a time-lapse, just regular HDR. So this is good if you're still doing HDR these days, then you can go ahead and do that right in the app. Sound trigger. So watch this. I'm going to do trigger. 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 That's pretty neat, right? So you can set the delay and you can do all that kind of stuff. So let's say you want to do a sound trigger and you want to You set it to low, you set your delay to like, 5 seconds, and then when everybody's ready in the frame, you say, tick, or something like that, right? And it takes a picture. Vibration. Right, so that'll be good for if you want to do it if there's an earthquake going on, or if there's some like fireworks or something like that. You can do that with like that. Motion, so you can set it up with the camera. And if there's motion going on, you can press here to start. Scenario, so you can set up a scenario. You can have sort of multiple scenarios going on if you want. And then, of course, you saw the neutral density calculator, and then there's also a solar calculator, which tells you your sunrise, your sunset for today and tomorrow. So that's the MIOPS. You can view it in the sort of blocks, or you can view it as a list. I kind of prefer the blocks. You can see everything in one page. The nice thing about MIOPS is they're constantly adding more things to it, more trigger types to it. And that's a really nice thing. So it's pretty neat that they're doing this. As I said, I used to use the TriggerTrap, and TriggerTrap's out of business. And it looks like for people who need a TriggerTrap style device, this is now the best thing now that TriggerTrap's out of the way, especially because they did something that TriggerTrap never did, which was have it completely wireless. I mean, you're still having something plugged into your camera, but now your phone is no longer tethered to your camera. So you can walk away like 30 to 60 feet, depending on the weather and line of sight and that kind of stuff. You can actually walk away and not have to, worry about being literally. So if you're tethered, you're this far from your phone has to be this far from your camera at most, right? You can stretch a little bit, and again, MIOPS also offers this for the more inexpensive route. You could do just the dongle. This is the dongle. But if you want to go the better route in going wireless, then the MIOPS remote, this device right here, is really the way to go. So I hope you check out MIOPS because I'm impressed. I think they sort of took what TriggerTrap, the revolution that TriggerTrap started, and they're taking it to a new level because they can do it wireless.